Ever walk into a room and just completely blank on why you're there?
Oh, all the time. Happens to everyone, I think.
Yeah, like our brains hit the delete button right when we walk through the door.
That's funny, in a way, right?
Yeah, well, maybe. But it also makes you wonder about how memory even works.
That's a great point, actually. There's a little window into this whole intricate world of memory. All those processes our brains are doing and encoding information, storing it, retrieving it.
And it's not like we're always in control of it,
Right,
right?
right.
Which is kind of what we're going to be looking at today. You've brought some pretty fascinating stuff about memory.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's dive in.
Sounds good. It's amazing when you think about how crucial memory is to everything we do.
Basically everything.
Learning new things, making decisions, even shaping who we are as people.
Yeah, it's like the backbone of our experiences.
Totally. One of the sources you sent, a study by Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, it really got me thinking about how malleable memory can actually be.
Malleable how?
Like, even little suggestions can change how we remember things that happened in the past.
That's kind of unsettling.
Yeah.
So if our memories are so easily influenced, how much can we really trust them?
Well, I mean, that's part of what makes memory so fascinating, right? Just this complex thing, not always reliable.
So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, it's important to remember that memory is not just this one single thing.
Right.
It's a whole system with different types working together. Like, first you have sensory memory. It's like a super quick first impression of things.
Right.
Like, think about the trail a sparkler leaves behind.
Uh-huh.
It's gone so fast. But for a moment, your brain sees it.
So it's like our brain takes a snapshot.
Pretty much. And then it decides if it's worth saving or not.
Got it.
Then there's short-term memory. Like, that's our mental notepad.
Okay.
It's where you keep something like a phone number you're about to dial.
Right.
But it's pretty limited. Most people can only hold like 7 things in mind for, what, 20 seconds?
Wow. Yeah, that's not much.
No, it's enough to do what you need in the moment, but if you don't do something with it, it's gone.
So sensory memory grabs our attention. Short-term memory holds on to it for a bit. But then how does anything become a long-term memory? The kind of memories that stick with us for years and years.
That's where things get really interesting. Because long-term memory, that's basically limitless. I mean, how much it can hold and how long it lasts. And even there, it's divided up.
Yeah.
You've got explicit memory, and then you've got implicit memory.
Okay, I think I've heard of those.
Explicit is for, like, consciously remembering facts or events, like your first day of school or what the capital of France is, that kind of thing.
So like when you're intentionally trying to remember something.
Yeah, exactly. And then implicit memory, that's more unconscious, more like skills and habits,
Okay.
like riding a bike or typing without looking at the keys.
Yeah.
Those are implicit. You don't have to think through each step.
It's wild how we can do all these complex things without even realizing the memory processes behind them.
I know, right?
So how does our brain actually turn an experience into a memory we can access later on?
Well, that's a big question.
It's all a bit of a mystery to me, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question scientists are still figuring out, but we know there are these 3 basic stages. You have encoding, storage, and retrieval.
Encoding is like how our brains transform information into something that can be stored, right?
Right, like translating our experiences into the brain's language.
I read that we encode information in different ways.
Mm.
There's visual, based on what we see, acoustic, based on sounds, and then semantic, based on meaning.
That's exactly it. And a lot of times we actually use all of those methods together. Think about if you were learning a new word.
Okay,
You
yeah.
might see it spelled out, say it out loud a couple times, and then try to understand the definition.
So you're using all 3 types of encoding
Exactly. You're laying down multiple tracks for that memory.
to make it stick better.
Right. And then once you've got the information encoded, well, it's got to be stored somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's where specific parts of the brain come in.
Like the hippocampus, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading about that.
The hippocampus is super important. It's kind of like a temporary storage center. It processes new memories and then sends them off to long-term storage in the cerebral cortex.
Okay, so it's like the brain's filing system.
Sort of, yeah. And then there's another part of the brain called the amygdala.
Yeah,
It deals with emotions.
that makes sense.
Like, if you think about how certain memories, especially emotional ones, just feel so strong,
Even years later.
even years later, that's the amygdala. It attaches emotional tags to memories.
So that explains why, like, a certain smell can suddenly bring back a rush of feelings from a past event.
Totally. It's like a direct line to how you felt in that memory.
Okay, so we encode the information and then our brains store it away. But then how do we actually find those memories when we need them?
That's retrieval, bringing those stored memories back into your conscious mind. And it's often triggered by things called retrieval cues.
Retrieval cues.
Yeah, it's anything that helps you find that specific memory. Could be a smell, a song from your past, or even just being in a place you haven't been to in a while.
So it's like those things act as a trigger.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Like breadcrumbs leading you back to the memory.
I've definitely had that happen with songs before. You hear a song you haven't heard in years, and suddenly you're right back in a certain time and place, feeling all the same emotions you felt back then.
Yeah, that's the power of retrieval cues.
It's like our senses have a key to unlock these hidden memory vaults in our minds.
That's a good way to put it.
But here's the thing. If our brains are so good at storing all these memories, why do we forget things?
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like my brain's more of a sieve than a steel trap. What's going on there?
Well, you're not alone there. Forgetting is totally normal.
It is.
Oh, yeah. It's just part of how memory works. There are a few reasons why it happens. One reason is simply decay. Memories fade over time, especially if we don't use them often.
So it's use it or lose it.
Kinda, yeah. If you don't walk a path often, it gets overgrown, right?
Makes sense.
But then there's something called interference. That's where memories get messed up or blocked by other memories. And there are two types of that, too. Proactive and retroactive.
Wow, it's all so complicated.
It is, yeah.
What's the difference between those two?
Proactive interference is when, like, old memories get in the way of new ones.
Oh,
Like, when you're trying to learn a new password, but your old one keeps popping into your head.
I do that all the time.
It happens to everyone.
What about retroactive?
That's when new information overwrites old stuff.
Ah, okay.
Like if you learn a new phone number, suddenly you might have trouble remembering the old one.
So it's like our brain is making space for the new information.
You could think of it that way, yeah. It's like updating the files. Sometimes some of the older information gets lost.
Wow, it's incredible to think about all these things happening in our brains every time we remember something.
And it gets even more incredible when you start thinking about how our brains actually change physically as we form memories.
Wait, really? So it's not just information being stored somewhere. Our brains actually change.
Yep. It's called neuroplasticity. It's the ability of the brain to change throughout our lives.
So our brains aren't static, they're constantly evolving.
They are. And it's all connected to how we learn and form memories. At a really tiny level, those memories are stored as connections between brain cells. Those connections are called synapses. It's kind of like building a bridge between two islands.
Okay.
The more you cross that bridge, the stronger it gets. So the more we use a memory, the stronger the connections get.
So every time we remember something, we're essentially rewiring our brains.
In a way, yeah.
That's mind-blowing. I remember we talked about how sleep plays a role in all of this too, right?
It's huge. Yeah. Sleep is super important for consolidating those memories.
Consolidating meaning.
Basically organizing and filing away all that important information, while also clearing out the clutter. Studies show that if people get enough sleep, they're way better at remembering what they learned the day before.
That makes sense. So getting enough sleep is actually doing our brains a big favor. But how much can our brains actually hold?
Ah, the big question. Well, one of the studies you sent over, they actually found that the brain's storage capacity is gigantic. They estimated it to be, get this, 2.5 petabytes.
Okay, 2.5 petabytes, that sounds like a lot. But how much is that really, like in terms of actual memories?
It's hard to wrap your head around, but think of it like this. It's enough to hold 3 million hours of TV shows. Imagine all that information.
That's crazy. It makes you appreciate just how powerful our brains are. So we've got this massive capacity for storing things, but it's not all about how much we can store, right? It's also about the quality of our memories and how our senses and emotions play into all of this.
That's a really important point. Memory isn't just cold, hard facts.
Right.
It's all mixed up with our senses and emotions. And that can have a huge impact on how we remember things.
Like, I've always found it so interesting how certain smells can trigger such strong memories.
Yeah. And that's because our sense of smell is directly connected to the amygdala and the hippocampus, those important memory centers we were talking about.
Ah, okay, so it's like a shortcut to the emotional part of a memory. What about those really intense memories that people sometimes have? I think they're called like flashbulb memories, where you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing when something major happened.
Flashbulb memories, they're fascinating. Incredibly vivid and detailed, like a snapshot of a moment frozen in time.
Exactly. It's like your brain took a picture.
I know, right? One of your sources, this study by Roger Brown and James Kulik, They actually looked into flashbulb memories around the assassination of President Kennedy.
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah. And what they found was that even years later, people had super detailed and consistent memories of exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news.
So these big emotional events, they leave a real mark on us.
They really do. But you have to remember, even these really powerful memories, they can still get distorted over time, just like any other memory.
So even our strongest memories might not be entirely accurate.
Exactly. And I think that's a good reminder that memory, it's not like a perfect recording of the past. It's more of a reconstruction, a process that can be influenced by all kinds of things, like our current emotions and what we believe.
It's a bit humbling to realize that even our most vivid memories may not be completely true, but that's part of what makes memory so interesting, right?
So, yeah,
This whole interplay between our experiences, perceptions, and emotions.
exactly. It's not a fixed thing. It's always changing.
Well, this has been amazing. We've covered so much, the different types of memory, how they're formed, and even how our brains physically change as we remember things. I think it's safe to say memory is a pretty essential part of who we are.
Definitely. It's at the core of our experiences, our learning, our sense of self. And the more we understand about how it all works, the more we can appreciate the incredible things our brains can do.
Well, I know I'm definitely feeling a whole new level of appreciation for my brain and all its little quirks and
Me
complexities.
too.
Before we move on, do you have any final thoughts on this part of our deep dive into memory?
You know, one of the things that always gets me is how interconnected everything is.
Okay.
It's not just this one single faculty. It's like a web of processes that's a part of every single aspect of our lives, from what we see and hear and feel to how we communicate and even our creativity.
It's like the operating system for our entire being.
Exactly. And the more we learn about it, the more we realize how much we don't know. It's a field with so much potential for new discoveries.
And that's what makes it so exciting. Always more to learn and understand about this incredible capacity of our minds.
Oh,
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive into the science of remembering and forgetting has been incredibly insightful. We've explored how memories are formed, why we forget, and even touched on some ways to improve our memory power.
it's been a great conversation.
I think so too. And in the next part, I think we should really dive into what we can do to improve our memories. I mean, it's fascinating to know how it all works, but I think we all want to know how to make our memories work better.
Absolutely. Let's get into some practical tips and techniques to boost our memory power after the break. So before the break, we were talking about all the complexities of memory. But one of the most common questions I get is, what can I actually do to make my memory better?
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I mean, knowing how it all works is great, but what we really want are the tools to, like, improve it.
Exactly.
So what's the secret? Is there a magic pill out there that can instantly boost our memory power? Or maybe, like, a brain training app that everyone should be using?
Well, I wish. If there was, I'd be the first one signing up. The truth is, there's no quick fix. But that doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. There are lots of practical strategies that can make a real difference. Things you can start incorporating into your life, like right now.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of those strategies? Where do we even begin?
Well, remember how we talked about how important sleep is?
Yeah.
It's not just about feeling rested. It actually plays a huge role in how our brains consolidate memories.
Right.
It's like giving your brain the time to process everything from the day, to organize it all and store it away.
So hitting that snooze button might actually be doing our brains a favor.
Maybe, yeah. But you have to be consistent about it. Quality sleep, that's what really matters. And another big thing is managing stress. You know, when we're constantly stressed out, our brains get flooded with this hormone called cortisol.
Okay.
And cortisol, it actually messes with memory function.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that when I'm stressed, it's harder to focus and remember things. It's like my brain's just fried.
Exactly. So finding ways to manage stress, whether that's through exercise, meditation, spending time in nature, anything that works for you, that can actually be really good for your memory.
It's like creating a calmer space for your brain to work in.
Totally. Speaking of exercise, you know, you sent over a study about how beneficial physical activity is for the brain.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was fascinating. He talked about how aerobic exercise, like running or swimming, it increases blood flow to the brain,
Mm-hmm.
which means brain cells are getting more oxygen and nutrients. And get this, it can even stimulate the growth of new brain cells.
Wait, hold on. New brain cells? I thought we were just stuck with the ones we were born with.
Nope. It turns out our brains are way more adaptable than we thought. And this process, this making of new brain cells, is called neurogenesis. And it happens a lot in a specific part of the hippocampus, that brain region that's so important for memory.
Wow. So exercise isn't just good for our bodies, it's actually helping our brains stay young and flexible.
You got it.
That's really encouraging. What about specific memory techniques? I've heard about things called mnemonic devices, but I'm not really sure how they work or if they're even that useful.
Mnemonic devices can be super helpful, and you'd be surprised how often you probably already use them without even realizing it. Like, that acronym ROYGBAM
Mm.
to remember the colors of the rainbow?
Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Oh, wow. I haven't thought about that in years, but yeah, it just came right back to me.
Right. So using acronyms, that's a type of mnemonic device.
Oh, I see.
It's a really simple but effective way to chunk information together and make it easier to remember. Another technique is creating visual images.
Okay.
Let's say you need to remember to buy milk, eggs, bread, and bananas from the grocery store.
Right.
So instead of just trying to repeat that list over and over in your head, you could picture this giant carton of milk
Sure.
cracking open
Mm-hmm.
to reveal a dozen eggs all nestled in a loaf of bread.
Okay.
And then a banana peel is like a slide coming out of it.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. And I can definitely see how picturing something like that would make it stick.
Right. It's like turning a boring list into a little movie in your head.
Mm.
The more vivid and outlandish the image, the better. Our brains remember things that stand out, that are unusual or funny or emotionally engaging.
That makes sense.
You can also use rhymes or songs. Like, think about jingles from when you were a kid.
Yeah.
You probably still remember some of them.
Oh, yeah.
Putting information into a song or a rhyme can make it so much catchier.
I'm definitely going to try using more mnemonic devices. But what about when we're trying to learn something that's really new and complex? Are there techniques that can help with that?
Definitely. One of the most important things is just to really pay attention to how you're learning.
Okay.
It sounds obvious, but so many of us try to multitask while we're learning,
Oh, yeah.
and that's not good for our brains.
I'm so guilty of that. I'm always trying to read or study while also checking my phone or having the TV on in the background.
Yeah, it's not the best strategy. When you're trying to learn something new, you need focus.
Mm.
Otherwise, you're not really encoding that information into your memory.
Right.
It's like trying to write on a piece of paper while someone's shaking the table. Those words are just going to be a jumbled mess.
So having a quiet, distraction-free environment is important.
Huge. Yeah. Find a quiet space, put your phone away, really give all your attention to whatever you're trying to learn. You'll be amazed by how much more effective your brain is when it's not being pulled in a million different directions.
Focus is key. What other strategies can we use to learn more effectively?
Think about how you organize information. Our brains love structure.
Oh.
So instead of just trying to memorize a bunch of random facts, find ways to connect those facts, to put them into categories that make sense.
But like using outlines or color coding to visually group similar pieces of information.
Exactly. Using visual aids like that can be a really good way to build a structure for remembering information.
Oh.
Oh, and another powerful technique is something called spaced repetition.
I've heard of that, but I'm not really sure what it is.
It's basically revisiting the information at different intervals. So instead of cramming everything in all at once, you space out your study sections.
Go.
You might review something an hour after you learn it, then again the next day, then maybe a few days later, and so on.
So it's like giving your brain a little nudge every so often to remind it that the information is important.
Yeah. It's like a workout for your brain, just like you do with your body. You're building strength and endurance.
You know what? That's a great way to think about it. We talked about how important physical activity is for overall brain health and memory. But I'm curious, how does exercise directly affect our memory?
Well, one thing is that exercise is a stress reducer and a mood booster.
Right.
And both of those things are really good for cognitive function.
Mm.
But there's also evidence that it directly improves something called synaptic plasticity.
Synaptic plasticity.
Yeah, that's how connections between neurons get stronger. And that's, super important for memory.
So by exercising, we're strengthening those neural pathways that are the foundation of our memories.
Exactly. And some studies even suggest that exercise can help protect against age-related cognitive decline, things like Alzheimer's. It's like giving your brain this extra layer of protection.
Wow, that's amazing. I feel like we've discovered a whole treasure trove of tools here. Mnemonic devices, mindfulness, spaced repetition, exercise. It's really cool to think that we have so much power to shape and strengthen our memories just through our everyday habits.
Absolutely. Remembering is an active process, not a passive one. The more you actively engage with the information, the more likely you are to remember it.
Okay.
So don't just passively read or listen to things. Find ways to interact with the material. Make it your own. Connect it to things you already know.
So it's about turning information into something that's meaningful, that has personal relevance.
You got it. And always remember, memory is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So keep challenging yourself, learn new things. The more you're actively using your brain, the better it's going to be at resisting age-related decline.
Before we move on, I'm just curious, are there any common myths or misconceptions about memory that you've come across, like things people believe that just aren't true?
That's a good question.
I think one big misconception is that memory works like a video recorder,
Okay. Yeah.
that it captures every little detail perfectly,
Right.
but that's not how it works at all. Memory is a lot more about reconstructing than reproducing.
Meaning we don't just play back memories like a recording, we actually rebuild them each time we access them.
Exactly. And every time we pull up a memory, we're putting it together from these little bits and pieces.
Okay.
And that process, well, it can be influenced by how we're feeling in the moment, our beliefs, even just the context of where we are when we're trying to remember.
So our memories aren't always that reliable. Something to be aware of, yeah. It's important to remember that our memories, they're shaped by our experiences. And that doesn't mean they're completely unreliable, but it's good to know that there's always potential for things to get distorted.
So they're more subjective than objective.
You could say that.
What other memory myths are out there?
Another big one is this idea that as we get older, our memory is just going to inevitably decline.
Oh, yeah.
And while it's true that some things might slow down a bit as we age, memory loss isn't a given.
Really?
Not at all. The research shows that how we live our lives plays a big role in cognitive health.
So there's hope for us all, even as we get older.
Absolutely. There's so much we can do. If we're physically active, eating a healthy diet, staying mentally active, managing our stress, all of that helps us maintain cognitive function as we age.
So we have a lot more control than we think.
We do. We can't control everything, but we can make choices that support our brain health. And those choices can really make a difference.
This has been incredible. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of memory, how it works, and even more importantly, what I can do to keep my mind sharp.
I'm glad to hear that. It's been great talking about all this with you.
It really has. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, maybe we can summarize some of the key takeaways for our listeners. What can people start doing today to improve their memories and take care of their brains?
That's a great idea. I think the most important thing is to remember that memory is a skill. And just like any skill, you can train it and make it stronger.
So don't let those brain muscles get lazy.
Exactly. Keep them active. And one of the best ways to do that is through, you guessed it, physical exercise.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that.
Find an activity you enjoy, whether it's walking, dancing, swimming, whatever. Just make it a regular part of your routine.
So get that blood pumping. It's not just good for your body, it's good for your brain. What about mental exercises?
Yeah.
What are some ways to keep our minds active?
Lots of things. Puzzles, crosswords, brain training games. You can take a class, learn a new skill or a new language, read books, watch documentaries, have conversations that make you think. It's all about exposing your brain to new information and new experiences.
So it's like creating a mentally stimulating environment for your brain to thrive in.
Exactly. And don't forget about those mnemonic devices we talked about. They're not just fun little tricks. They can really help you remember things.
Right.
Try using acronyms, visual images, rhymes, anything that works for you. Get creative. And don't forget about spaced repetition. Don't try to cram everything in all at once. Review information at different intervals to help solidify it.
Spaced repetition. It's like sending your brain a little reminder. And speaking of reminders, we can't forget about the importance of getting enough sleep and managing stress. Those things have a huge impact on our cognitive function.
So true. Prioritize sleep. Make it a non-negotiable. And find healthy ways to de-stress.
It's all connected, right?
It really is. It's about taking care of your whole self, mind, and body. Because when you take care of your brain, you're really taking care of yourself.
This has been so insightful. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
I know.
From understanding how memory works to learning practical strategies for improving it.
We've learned that it's not just a storage space. It's a dynamic process that's always evolving.
And that we have more power than we think to influence it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can make choices that support our memory and help us keep our minds sharp.
That's a great message for our listeners. So, as we go about our days making new memories and remembering old ones, let's try to really appreciate those memories.
Yes.
Embrace those little pieces of our past that make us who we are.
Beautifully said. I've loved exploring the world of memory with you today.
Me too. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and those memories alive. Okay, so we're back ready to wrap up our deep dive into the amazing world of memory. We've uncovered some really cool stuff, haven't we?
We have. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. We started off talking about those everyday moments when our memories just fail us, like walking into a room and forgetting why you went there.
Yeah, those little brain glitches we all experience.
Exactly. But then we really dug into the different types of memory, sensory, short term, long term. And it's amazing how much our brains are doing all the time behind the scenes, all that encoding, storing, retrieving information. It's mind boggling when you really think about it.
It is, and it's not just some abstract process happening somewhere in our heads either. We
Right.
talked about how memories are actually physically embedded in our brains, those connections between neurons getting stronger every time we use them.
Yeah, like that bridge getting more solid the more we cross it. That's such a great visual for how our brains actually change as we learn and remember things.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from this whole conversation is that our brains are so much more adaptable than we often give them credit for. It's not like we're stuck with what we have, they're constantly evolving based on our experiences.
That's what's so exciting about this field. It's not about just accepting decline. It's about understanding that we have the power to influence how our brains age.
Right. So we've got this whole toolbox of strategies we can use, like mnemonic devices, space repetition, and the importance of things like sleep, managing stress, and exercise. It's like we're not powerless. We can actually take steps to keep our minds sharp.
Exactly. And we also talked about how some of the common beliefs about memory are just plain wrong. Like our memories aren't perfect recordings, and memory loss isn't an inevitable part of aging.
I think that's a really important message for our listeners. It's not all downhill from here. So, as we wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways that people can start applying in their lives, like today, to improve their memories?
Well, one of the most important things to remember that memory is a skill. And just like any other skill, you can train it and get better at it. So make that conscious effort, engage your mind, challenge yourself, and never stop learning.
So, don't let those brain muscles go soft. Keep them working. What are some specific things people can do?
We talked about exercise, remember? It's not just about being physically fit. It's about keeping your brain healthy, too. So find an activity you enjoy, make it part of your routine. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Get that blood pumping. But what about mental exercises? How can people keep their minds actively engaged?
Oh, there are so many ways. Puzzles, brain training games, learning a new language or a musical instrument, reading, having thought-provoking conversations, all of that helps.
It's like creating a stimulating environment for your brain.
Yeah. And don't forget about those mnemonic devices we talked about. They can be really effective tools. Try using acronyms, creating visual images, putting information to a rhyme. And remember, spaced repetition. Review things at intervals to really help that information stick.
So it's like giving your brain little reminders along the way. And of course, we can't forget about sleep and stress management. Those are so crucial.
They really are. Make sleep a priority and find healthy ways to manage stress. Your brain will thank you.
So it's all connected, taking care of our minds and our bodies.
Absolutely. It's about taking a holistic approach to memory care, which is really just taking care of ourselves.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for how intricate and amazing memory is.
It's definitely a fascinating topic.
We've learned so much about how memories are formed, why we forget, and most importantly, what we can do to improve our memories. So, as we go out into the world, creating new memories and remembering old ones, let's try to appreciate them, those moments, those experiences that make up our lives.
It's beautifully put.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure exploring this world with you.
It really has.
That's it for this deep dive. Keep those minds sharp, everyone.